What is it about the Camino that urges or even allows us to open up to complete strangers? What is it, Michael?
You know, I wished I had the answer to that, but I really do believe that's the magic of the Camino. I've done it now 3 times, and every single time I'm forever amazed at what stories I hear, as well as what stories I share on the Camino. And I think there's just something magical about having to walk long distances. I think in Spain, one of the things that you get right away is a real sense of the past. Okay. When you walk from village to village, you realize that wow, we've been around for a long time, okay? And you see those 10th, 12th century churches, and you walk into them and you realize that perhaps your problems have been problems of others, okay? And that all of a sudden we're in this place together and we open up enough to share those with each other.
Mm.
And I think it's really one of the gifts of the Camino.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I often say how the pack, pulling it on your shoulders opens your heart, and walking
Yeah,
side by side with someone allows you to talk with them rather than to them. But
exactly.
of all the things, it's walking poles that gives you a very valuable insight into who you ought to be rather than who you realize you actually are. You write in the book, I had never been kind or compassionate to myself. You said, you cannot give what you do not have. Imagine that
That's
line,
right.
right? You wrote that line, Michael Rucker, not me. I had never been kind or compassionate to myself. You cannot give what you do not have.
Exactly.
How did you manage that change?
You know, it's really funny because on the Camino, the first 2 weeks, every day I had a different theme. Okay. And the themes would come to me in the morning. Okay. The first day was love and then friendship. And then finally we got to kindness and compassion. And I just remember right away saying to myself, I always thought of myself as a very kind and compassionate person. But then I realized you've never been kind and compassionate to yourself. So how would you know what a kind and compassionate person acts like or is? And all day long, I really, really thought about that. And it's funny you bring that up because still to this day, if I'm challenged or if I'm having a rough day or I can't figure something out, I always come back to beating myself up or, critiquing what I'm doing. And then I stop and I say, how can you be kind and compassionate to yourself right now?
Mm.
Okay. And in doing so, I see just this change, okay, that comes over me. And frankly, the same goes with, we're all challenged by people around us, family, friends, colleagues, what have you, that will all get on our nerves at some point, including ourselves. And so today I stop myself often when I get to that point. I'm like, how can you be kind and compassionate to yourself right now at this moment? It really was one of the most beautiful lessons learned from my first Camino.
Yeah, and you had, though, steered that steered that sailboat in a way in a way to pick up on that headwind, right? You were very much responsible for putting yourself in a place where you could make the most of that, and that's to your great credit because that was a massive challenge, a massive accomplishment. You write in the book about what are monumental moments in life, massive moments for anyone. They're for the book, not for this chat, but you write in the book, and I'll read a little passage. You're on the Meseta. The Meseta offered no distractions, no way to numb or sidestep or outrun any of it. Just miles and miles of walking with nothing to do, but finally, look. What surprised me was not the pain of remembering, it was the peace that came with it. For the first time in my life, I was not running from these memories or drinking them away or burying them under achievement and motion. I was walking through them, one step at a time, letting them rise and settle and release. The rawness was real, but it was not unbearable. In fact, it felt like grace. I began to understand that I did not need to relive these things again. I only needed to acknowledge them, name them, and let them go. So tell us about those moments on the Meseta. Describe that feeling for us when you could name them, acknowledge them, and let them go.
Yeah, the Meseta, I find it to be a really special part of the Camino experience. I say by the time you get to the Meseta, your body's pretty much got accustomed to walking, your feet have got accustomed to walking every day, and then you just see this vastness. And
Yes.
I've walked both all of my Caminos in the fall, so you just see this. Most of the harvest is already picked up. They're just empty fields. Okay, and for me, that emptiness was almost an invitation to take a deep dive. Okay, to really take a deep dive I mean, I went back to as far back as I could in my childhood, and so many key experiences, not to relive them, not to rehash them, but as you said, to just acknowledge them. Okay, and to for the first time be able to say, yes, that was part of my life, we can move on. Okay,
Mm, mm, mm,
and it just was such an amazing part of the Camino experience for me, but more importantly, a life experience to be able to, when you turn 60 and you're getting close to that, there's a point when you say, I've lived a long part of this life already. So how do I acknowledge that, see it, respect it for what it is, and then how do I look forward? And for me, that was a big part of the Meseta, and I found it to be just absolutely fascinating and incredible. But there is a real rawness to it. Okay,
mm,
that fortunately, and this is the wonderful part, I walked most of my Caminos 90% of the time alone. Okay,
mm.
didn't mean that I
Yeah.
didn't meet people, because I met a lot
No.
of people,
Yeah.
and I never felt alone. I felt very much connected. And the wonderful thing about the Mesetas is you would take this deep dive during the day, and then in the evenings you would have dinner. And I mean, these little tiny villages where you really had nothing else to do but be together. And it just was the paradox of that for me was really incredible.